Hi everyone, TJ from Avid here, and welcome back to Pro Tools Fast Start. In our last video, we used MIDI to sequence a drum pattern, and what we have so far sounds like this. Now that's a great start. We have a strong foundation, but today we're going to add 3 more instruments to this track using MIDI. But instead of using the MIDI editor to draw in the notes, we're going to play our parts on something called a MIDI keyboard. Now, when we tracked drums, if you recall, we had to record enable our drum track so we could hear back what we were doing with our notes. And that's this button right here with the red outline and the white circle. We're going to do the same thing to this piano track because that's the track that we're going to start with. Now, before we start playing this instrument, let's make sure that our MIDI keyboard is set up correctly in Pro Tools. My MIDI keyboard is plugged into my computer via USB. And to make sure that Pro Tools is recognizing it, we can go up here to Setup, we can go down to MIDI, and we can click on MIDI Input Devices. Now, this list will show you all the devices that are connected to your computer that are capable of sending MIDI messages. And you want to make sure that your particular keyboard that you have plugged in is selected. My keyboard is selected here, so I press OK. And now when I press a key on my keyboard, it triggers our piano track in Pro Tools, which means we are ready to go. Now, if you don't have a MIDI keyboard, that's no problem. Pro Tools has a really cool feature that allows you to use your computer keyboard as a MIDI keyboard. And you can access that by going up here to Window and clicking on MIDI keyboard. Now, this window pops up that will allow you to use your computer keyboard to trigger the keys on your piano. So if I press some keys on my computer keyboard, it's triggering our piano track, which is really pretty cool. Now, I don't need this today because I have my MIDI keyboard hooked up via USB, so I go ahead and close out of that. And the final step before we record is I'm going to change the sound that we're using. If you remember from our drum video, we were able to load our virtual instrument by going here to the Insert Selector. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to go to Multi-Channel Plugin, scroll down to Instrument, and select this right here, Expand 2. Expand is an amazing instrument with so many awesome sounds. I strongly encourage you to take some time, thumb through the presets, and find something that inspires you. But I have the sound that I want to use saved as my own preset, so I load it up right here. Let's make sure that we're triggering it with our MIDI keyboard. And we are, so we're good to go. Let's close out of Expand. Now, in real life, when you're playing with a band, you want someone to count you in so that everyone starts at the same time, and the same principle applies in recording. Thankfully, we can do that up here in the top right of our window. We have this option that says Count Off. Now, when it's green, that means it is selected. We can turn it on or off. But this will count us in before we start recording so we can start on time. We changed the length, but 1 bar works perfectly for me, so I'm going to leave it right there. Now, one more thing that I like to do is I like to turn my metronome track on. In the last video, we turned it off, but I like to have that to really help me reinforce my rhythm while I'm recording. Now, let's go to the beginning of our track. Our piano track is record enabled, and before we start recording, the last step here is we're going to name this track. I double click and I'm going to call this Electric Piano. Press OK. And now we are ready to go. So I press this record button up here at the top. And now when I press spacebar, Pro Tools is going to count me in and I'm going to start playing. Here we go. First recording in Pro Tools. Let's do this. Press spacebar to stop recording, and there's my piano track. Now, onto our MIDI editing options. Everything I played in my track is editable via MIDI. And if we double click on this clip here, it opens up our MIDI editor, which is going to look familiar from our last video. And in our MIDI editor, I can change any note that I want by simply clicking and dragging up or down, forward or backward. I can even change multiple notes at a time. by clicking and dragging a box around whole chords or sections and doing the same thing. I'm going to press Z to undo those changes. And there are some deeper features that we're going to talk about in a second, things that we can do in this MIDI editor that really help us take our MIDI tracks to the next level. Let's close out of this for now and move on to our next instrument. Now, we don't have any more instrument tracks available for us that are already set up, so we're going to have to create some. And we can do that by going up here to Track and clicking on New. Now, we have some options here. Don't worry too much about these yet. I'm going to go over the difference between some of these in future videos, but for now, we want to create 2 new mono instrument tracks. We're not recording a microphone or a live guitar. We're triggering a virtual instrument, so make sure that the track type is instrument track. Now we're going to click Create, and Pro Tools is going to create 2 new instrument tracks for us. I'm going to name these tracks Kalimba and Bass. Now, there's one more concept that I want to introduce to you, and it's something that I use all the time. It's an unbelievably powerful feature in Pro Tools called real-time properties. We can see our real-time properties by going up here, clicking on View, scrolling down to Edit Window Views, and then clicking on Real-Time Properties. Now, there are a few options here, but the thing that we're going to focus on today is this quantize feature. If you're not familiar with quantizing, it takes the notes that you've played via MIDI and it locks them to your grid so that everything is perfectly aligned and really tight, which is an amazing feature to have when you're making electronic music or any track that you want to be really tight to your grid. So I'm going to record enable my Kalimba track, and now let's load up a sound that we want to use. First thing we do is we go over to our insert selector. We're going to go Plugin, Instrument, and once again, we're going with Expand to. I have another patch that I've saved as a preset called Kalimba. I click here to load it. Let's make sure that our MIDI keyboard is triggering it. And it is, so we're good to go. Let's close out of here and once again, go to the top of our track to record. I press the record button, and now when I press spacebar, Pro Tools will count us in, and I'll start playing. I press spacebar to stop recording, and there's our Kalimba track. Now, if I select this clip and utilize this quantize feature in real-time properties, you see our notes shift a little bit. And when I double click on the clip, you can see that they're perfectly aligned to our grid, which is nearly impossible to play for humans, but it really makes our track sound nice and tight. So I'm going to keep that there, and I'm going to move on to our next track, which is Bass. I'm going to record enable this track, and once again, I'm going to go over to my insert selector, choose Plugin, scroll down to Instrument, and this time I'm going to load Vacuum. Vacuum is another synthesizer plugin that's included with Pro Tools, and it has some amazing sounds that I love to use for bass. Once again, I've saved a preset that I really like right here. I'm going to load that up, make sure that my MIDI keyboard is triggering it. And it is, so let's close out of this. Now, before we record our bass track, let me show you another amazing feature of real-time properties. If I click the quantize option before I even record anything, Pro Tools is going to take the notes that I'm playing in real time and lock them to the grid while I'm playing them, which is a really amazing feature, and it takes a lot of guesswork out of the process of lining things up to the grid after the fact. So once again, let's move to the beginning of our track. I press record, and when I press spacebar, Pro Tools is going to count me in, start recording, and lock my notes to the grid in real time. Once again, press spacebar to stop, and there's our track. Now, you'll notice that I can toggle quantize on or off to decide whether I like my track better quantized or unquantized. You'll notice that my electric piano track is not quantized because I want it to have that human feel. I want it to be a little imperfect. Now we've tracked electric piano, kalimba, and bass. Let's hear what we have from the top. Now, in our next video, I'm going to show you how to record audio into Pro Tools. Whether you play guitar or you sing, whatever instrument you have, if you want to plug it directly in Pro Tools and record audio, I'm going to show you how to do that on our next video, so make sure you stick around and join us next time. As always, thanks for hanging with us, and we'll see you soon.